He was a representative, he's an attorney, he's a father, and he's a husband, and now he's going to be a senator. I'm joined today by Senator Scott Talley for District 12, and we're going to talk a little bit about what are the issues facing the state of South Carolina and the election process as a whole. Senator, I want to first thank you for joining me today.
Sure, and I hope you're right. I still have to go through the general election, which hopefully is a formality at this point, but obviously we don't assume anything in this business.
I want to first ask you, why would you put this on yourself? The way politics works these days, the way the country's divided, why would you want to put yourself in such a situation like this?
Well, people have to be involved. Our system was set up to be a representative government. You mentioned I'm the father of 3 boys. My wife and I tell them, it's easy to sit on the sidelines and do nothing, but if you really want to be involved, if you want to help make change, if you want to shape the future of whatever form it may be their school, our community, our state, you got to be involved. And so there were a lot of folks that were critical of Washington, Columbia over the last 8 years in particular as it pertains to this Senate seat. And so I decided to get involved and see if we could make a difference.
I want to ask you, tell me about the election process. You can begin with what motivated you and just end with how you've been trying to get some downtime in so you're not so stressed about it anymore.
Well, I think I just touched on what motivated me, and that's the ability to get involved and make change. And obviously we have elections, so people have choices. In this race, they had 4 choices. And I think there were some things that we all agreed on. There was obviously some things we disagreed on. But my message from day one throughout the campaign was I think we deserve a seat at the table in Spartanburg and Greenville counties, particularly the Senate district. And the way we went about it was just going out knocking on doors. We knocked on thousands of doors. We made a lot of individual voter contacts just to say, hey, here's who I am, here's what I stand for, here's what I'd like to do if I'm elected. I don't know that the pace has slowed down since the runoff. My wife and I did take some time to get away, but since then it's been meeting with people to thank them for their support and also to begin educating myself on issues I may not be as familiar with by meeting with people in the community and across the state to try to get ready to be productive come January and get some things done right away.
Tell me about those endorsements you got. I was there that day in Duncan. You got them from the mayor of Duncan, you got them from David, and you even got the governor. How critical were those endorsements to you in order to boost your support?
Oh, they were super important. And I've said since the 28th of June, this was totally a team effort. There are a lot of folks that wanted to see change, and I just happened to be fortunate to be the recipient of that support. Lisa and David, to their credit, both during conversations we had in the campaign expressed the same desire I had, and that was to see somebody other than the incumbent in that seat come January of 2017. So they stuck to their word. I worked with the governor. We were both in the House at the same time. She and I both pushed a conservative reform agenda in the House. So she knows about my service and how I work in Columbia. And she wanted to get involved. She reached out to us before the primary, and we certainly welcomed her support, and I look forward to working with her. She's got 2 years left in office. There's some issues that she's worked really hard on that I don't think the legislature's gone far enough on. Ethics reform is one of those, so we're going to have conversations over the next couple months about how we can strengthen the ethics reform law. I said throughout the campaign that people have lost trust in Columbia, and that's true. And part of it is we've got a self-policing legislature. We've got investigations that continue to go on. So if we're going to ask people to trust the legislature and know that we've got your best interests at heart, we've got to allow some sunshine in the process. And so that's going to be one of the things that we work on over the next couple of months so that come January we can hit the ground running with a strong bill and try to push it through.
I'd like to touch up on that ethics reform. I've read about it. I don't know if it's necessarily right for the governor to say the Democrats wanted to kill it. They were upset that the bill does not regulate campaign spending from outside of the groups. It also does not require officials to disclose how much money they make. It really only discloses the source of where the income comes from. Even Senator Larry Martin said it's just a start. Do you want to push that bill to go farther and solve those issues, or do you not think that's important right now?
I think there are 3 pieces that have to be covered. One, I have no problem, and I did it this year, even though it wasn't mandatory, disclosing all sources of my income on the Statement of Economic Interest form. The critical part of that is the self-policing provision. You know, I don't even know that we need going forward a House Ethics Committee and a Senate Ethics Committee. We have a State Ethics Commission, and so I think it can play a role in campaign finance scrutiny and looking at reports that we have to file on a quarterly basis as far as our donors and our expenditures. The last point you touch on really, you know, I think is going to be a key point of the debate, and that is outside interest groups that want to influence elections in South Carolina or push certain initiatives in South Carolina do not have to disclose their donors like a candidate for office does. I think that's something we need to look at as well. It's been referred to as dark money. There's a lot of it that's been spent in the state over the last several years, and so I think that'll be a key point of any bill that we put forward as well.
Section H3184 of the bill talks about the 8-member committee that is now an independent investigation and can make recommendation to the House and Senate as they investigate. But half of this is picked by senators and the legislatures. It doesn't seem so independent if the people of the committee are being picked by the people that they might be, they might be on trial one day. Does that sound a little sketchy at all?
That's sketchy, and what you said is sketchy as well, in that committee is only empowered to make recommendations back to the House and the Senate. So that doesn't remove self-policing at all. That's a facade that was painted to give the appearance of we're doing something independent, but as you said, there's no independence there. Not only do the House and Senate members appoint the committee, but the committee has no authority to act other than to make a recommendation back to that body who would have one of its members that was being investigated at that time.
Mm-hmm. Now, they did say the hearings of these will become public, which I think that is also a way to cover up in what I was reading on this bill. So the hearings that are public for this sound okay, but how are you going to push for this to go farther and sound a little more independent than those picking the members of the committee, being the legislatures or the senators?
Well, that committee shouldn't have authority solely to make recommendations. They should have authority to act. I mean, if you put the recommendation back to the body, you still have that self-policing element. So I think the key component to all of it is that the independent body, number one, be independent, and number two, have the authority to act. If it's only making recommendations back to the body, you're not really removing the self-policing.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell me about you being pro-business. The governor brought that up several times. You're an attorney. You work in the law. What makes you pro-business?
No, well, you're sitting in a small business. I employ 6 people. You know, we pay our taxes. I have employees that come here seeking a paycheck. A lot of our clients are small businesses. We pay business license fees just like all the other businesses. That's a common misnomer, you know, and I hear that often. But a lot of the law firms in the upstate are small business as small business can get. You know, we don't have huge HR departments. You know, we're our HR department, we're our payroll department, etc. So you're sitting in a 6-employee small business right now.
What kind of business do you want to bring to the upstate? How are you going to help those businesses grow?
Well, it gets down to really tax and regulatory policy. If we continue to tax businesses that are already here, that hinders their ability to invest, to grow, to further develop product, to employ more people. You know, every dollar sent to the government is a dollar that could be going to a private person in the form of salary or wages. So taxes certainly play into that. Regulations, what we make them do falls into much that same category. If you over-regulate a business, the expense of complying with those regulations, the fact that you have to employ people to be in compliance versus be productive in making a product, selling a service, selling a good, is 2 things that I think the state really has to be critical of. Second is, and I said throughout the campaign, you know, we're on this 85 corridor with Highway 290, Highway 101. There is a lot of industry looking to locate in this area. We've got to improve on our infrastructure. That's been a key component of this campaign as well, because that's one of the first things folks from the outside or inside, quite frankly, are looking at. Do they want to invest in an area where people that are already there are willing to invest themselves for the betterment of the future of the area? And so those things, I think, in particular, are what will matter to the business community.
Mm-hmm. Now, Some of the governor likes to tweet about new jobs and businesses coming around the area. So Tower International announced on July 12th 140 jobs opening in Fountain Inn. Yangfang Auto announced a $71 million investment and 35 jobs also in Fountain Inn, and they're headquartered in China, by the way. And Borgeson Universal Corporation announced 36 new jobs in Travelers Rest, and that's manufacturing a lot of things for the automotive industry as well. So what kind of business do you want to bring up around like the BMW plant that is not too far from the 290 exit?
No, it's not. And we've been fortunate that that has brought a lot of other businesses to the area in the form of suppliers, vendors. What it's also done is shown the world that an international powerhouse can come to the upstate and be successful and employ folks in the upstate and grow in the upstate. So I think beyond the fact that it itself has created jobs, it's been a great selling point for the area and will continue to be one. The inland port, there's an argument that the inland port would not be where it's located if it weren't for BMW and all its suppliers that have located here and the services it can do. So I think beyond that, we have to continue to look outside the automotive spectrum. We still have a strong manufacturing base here in the upstate. That's something that will continue to grow. We've also got large retailers that are looking to come into the area. They create jobs, they spur development. But the sensitive thing that we have to be mindful of at the state is we can't wait for all this to happen and then try to address our infrastructure needs. We've got to address them now so that it creates less headache for the taxpayers going forward.
Mm-hmm. So what are some ideas, what are some businesses you have in mind that you think would be of good to the area that you've just been thinking about?
Well, there's no specific business. There are types of businesses,
What kind of types?
Well, like I said, manufacturing, people that would come in and do that. We have a huge opportunity, but to truly grow the revenue of the area, to improve on personal wealth, personal income, we've got to continue to look for those manufacturing jobs that are going to come here, that are going to grow, that are going to have an impact like a BMW, that have suppliers and vendors that would come. We've had a lot of warehousing and other jobs that have come to the area, but hopefully we can land some big deals like Touray that's coming on 290. It's under construction now, for Belco, those types manufacturing jobs.
I want to talk about something more social now. This is something that only Mayor Lisa Scott had on her campaign page. South Carolina is ranked #1 in the United States for domestic violence. It's been in the top 10 the last 18 years. Now, you have 3 boys, but one of the biggest things I think a dad always teaches his son is to treat a woman with respect.
Right.
And of 100,000 people, particularly women, 2.32% in the state are killed by people they know, and it's more than twice the national average. This is a really specific issue, I think, for the state. Do you have any thoughts on this, how you might help solve it?
Well, one of the things we always have to look at is our enforcement mechanism at present working? Some would obviously say that it's not. So you look at somebody that gets a first offense domestic violence charge, a second offense domestic violence charge, and I know those issues have been debated. Though that is really what we have to look at. The judiciary plays a big role in this too, because we can put the strongest laws on the books as a legislature, but if it's not being enforced by the judicial branch, that creates a problem. So I think those are the 2 things in particular that we would need to look at is are our laws really protecting the citizens? And if they are they being properly administered by the judiciary branch to keep people that should not be back out in society with the potential to harm others out there?
Mm-hmm. So 60% of female victims were killed by guns, and 66% of those were handguns. Do you think guns in particular play any effect in, for the 4th year in a row, South Carolina being #1 with this issue?
Well, I think it's the person holding the gun that plays a lot more, which goes back to what I just said. That gun is an inanimate object that requires somebody to take action. And so let's go back to what I just said are the laws that we have in place keeping people who should not be back in those situations away from those situations? And if not, that's where our failure is.
So one of the president's ideas was there's no background checks for a lot of people who want to buy guns at gun shows. There's a lot of gun shows in South Carolina. the president also says online there's really no background checks such as law-abiding citizens wanting to go into the stores to buy any. Doesn't that seem like a loophole that should be closed in that sort of case?
Not when you use the word law-abiding like you just did, because the gun laws, the background checks, things of that nature that we already have in place are to make sure that weapons don't get in the wrong hands. So I don't know the statistic, but I'd be interested to see how many of the weapons that have been purchased by law-abiding citizens, be it through proper channels in a store, going through a background check, or going to a gun show, have actually resulted in criminal activity.
So go into detail a little bit. You were also brought up by the government about being pro-Second Amendment. You've been talked about, just pro-Second Amendment by a lot of people. How passionate really are you about that? How strong or important do you think it is?
Well, that seems right now to be the easiest constitutional right for people to attack. And I think when you start whittling that away, you really are getting down to what is the function of the Constitution. So yes, I am pro-Second Amendment. It does say that the right of the people to bear arms should not be infringed. Nobody's happy about what's happening in our country right now. But I dare say that the folks that have used these weapons didn't go in the store necessarily and buy them and go through a background check, or didn't go to a gun show. That's where our real problem is when it comes to guns, is making sure that people who are abiding the law have the right to exercise their Second Amendment freedom, but cracking down on people that are causing these heinous crimes, to find out what's really going on there, because I don't think they're going about it the way you or I would.
So I am from the state of Maryland. They've done a lot. They're a lot more strict up there. They've limited to you have semi-automatic weapons. You can't have one that fires more than 10 rounds, maybe 15 rounds out in the Midwest, such as Colorado. And a new CBS News report shows South Carolina is ranked 11th in the nation for gun violence. So what's the solution then? What do you think you and the governor and the Senate would be pushing for to make sure people in South Carolina are safe?
Well, it goes back to the same thing we talked about, domestic violence. One, you've got to make sure your criminal laws are sufficient. Are they sufficient to keep people who should not be on the street incarcerated or away from harming other people? That's step one. Second step is, if those laws are there, make sure they're being properly enforced by the judiciary. Somebody that's charged with a crime. Federal guidelines have sentencing guidelines. If you're charged with a crime in federal court, there's sentencing guidelines. We give a lot of discretion to our judges in state courts as to their enforcement of our laws. So I think those two components alone are what we really have to crack down on.
So tell me about anything I haven't touched on yet. What is some of the biggest issues facing the state of South Carolina that no one's really brought up yet that you want to help change?
Well, we've touched on three that I think are really important and impact a lot of things, that being ethics. Again, I just don't think that we can expect people to trust Columbia or look to Columbia to do anything positive for the future of the state until we get that issue right. Second is infrastructure, so that we can continue to grow our economy. We need to do that. The state is ripe for development, but we've got to focus on that issue to encourage that. And then third would be just this whole idea of tax policy that we have. I've said on the campaign trail that one thing we do each year is we just start this next year's budget based on last year's budget. So I think looking at some zero-based budgeting in certain agencies is going to be critical. It's not flashy. It's not going to happen overnight. But we really need to scrutinize where taxpayer dollars are being spent so that we know that we're doing the best we can for the taxpayers of the state.
Mm-hmm. So I want to touch on a movement that is brought up now. They took over a couple interstates outside of Columbia. They tried to take over 385. The fire chief of Columbia, one of them got fired for tweeting, "I will run you guys over if you don't leave," and that's Black Lives Matter. Let's just start with the movement from what you've been seeing. Tell me about Black Lives Matter from what you've witnessed.
Well, all I know is what I've seen, through media reports. I think all lives matter: white, black, Latino, and so I think that goes back to some of these issues we've touched on earlier. Is what is the root cause of the crimes being committed that are leading to the movement that you just referenced. I know that our state law enforcement division, I know our local sheriff's offices have been very tuned to what's going on, paid attention to what they're trying to do to protect the public, but also to protect law enforcement, who protects us on a daily basis.
So 18% of South Carolinians live in poverty, unfortunately, totals to about 843,860. Of that, 28.8% of those are African Americans, and black communities continue to fall down below the poverty line, and there's just so much distrust going on in South Carolina, along with the Walter Scott situation in North Charleston. And we've been seeing it in Louisiana, Minnesota, and unfortunately in Dallas. The South Carolina people don't want that to come here. Can we do something in Columbia to pass body camera laws, or just ways for new training so the police and the minority communities don't have these confrontations anymore?
Yeah, and those conversations are already taking place in Columbia as far as what we have to do, not only to protect the public, but also to protect law enforcement and make sure things are on the up and up, and to prevent those situations here. And you touch on communities that are in poverty and things like that. All these issues tie together. If you look at the economic development opportunities that we have in the upstate, that's improved our school system because there's more revenue. The schools are nice, they're technologically advanced, you're attracting good teachers to the area, and people are getting a good education. That's not happening everywhere in South Carolina, so we have to look for ways to make that happen. And one of the bills I introduced when I was in the House was called the Textile Mill Revitalization Act. It was geared exactly at what you're talking about, and that is textile mill towns were the economic center of the state for years. The mills close, people move away, housing becomes dilapidated, falls down, revenue's not there, schools suffer because of it. So the idea behind that was to go into communities that were once thriving and try to, from the state level, provide incentive for folks to come in and create jobs, create housing opportunities to try to build those communities back up. And you're starting to slowly see that. You don't have to go too far from where we sit right now is a good example. The Drayton Mill off of Pine Street. I know we're here in Spartanburg, but Drayton was a community that Milliken had a powerful mill, a very large mill that was there for years. It closed down and everything around it just kind of fell into a state of disrepair. That's now changing because somebody's going in and seeking that economic development opportunity.
Yeah, something about economic opportunity in the country and around the state of South Carolina as a whole. In the state of South Carolina, women, for every dollar a man make, work the same job, work the same hours. Women only make 80.3 cents in what a man makes for a dollar. That seems like social inequality right there, and sexism in the workplace. Do you think there's any way to change that?
Well, I don't know that that's government's role. That's something that's set by the private sector. There are 5 women that work here. So I think that's a very subjective question. Should the government come in and say, we got to set wages here for whatever reason? I don't think that's government's role.
Mm-hmm. I'll just touch on a few federal issues, and I think that could about close it. So raising the minimum wage.
No, sir.
Abortion.
Pro-life.
Should there be a time limit, such as maybe allow them 5 weeks, 15 weeks, 20 weeks like South Carolina?
No. And if you listen to the debate in Columbia that just happened on the 20-week, obviously at the state level, while we have our deep-rooted beliefs that there should not be abortion, we're subject to a Supreme Court opinion from many, many years ago. And so at the state level, we've tried and we will continue to try to do everything we can to pass laws that move that line while still being compliant and not creating something that's unconstitutional.
Allowing Syrian refugees to settle in South Carolina.
I think that we've got to really work with the federal government on that issue to make sure we understand and track who's coming in. I know there was a bill that passed in Columbia this year that kind of called for a registry type system. It's unfortunate that we live in the day and age that we do, that you have people that are really trying to escape tyranny and poverty and all the above, but we can't put our people at risk, and one person is all it would take to really make that a disaster for us.
Siding with Donald Trump, building up the wall and closing the Mexican border.
Nothing we can do about that at the state level. That's his issue. I wish him well in that endeavor.
One thing I forgot to talk about, the 106.3 debate, Lee Bright publicized that all over his Facebook page. Oh, you know, Scott Talley sides with Planned Parenthood. He passed a bill for Planned Parenthood. But tell me your standpoint. What did you take from that debate, or what did the people who saw more of it take from it?
Yeah, what I understood his reference to be were certain provisos in state budgets during my time in the House. His claim was that money pursuant to those provisos went to Planned Parenthood. I told him then, and I would say, you know, without reservation, I never voted to fund Planned Parenthood. We looked into that just to make sure that there was not something stuck in the budget that confused a lot of us, and I'm told that there was not. You know, it's interesting, he says that right before that debate he was endorsed by several sitting legislators, many of whom voted for the same state budgets I did. So, you know, they are pro-life senators and representatives as well. I know he, you know, prided himself, so to speak, on voting against every budget, but there are a lot of pro-life legislators that voted for those same budgets, so I don't know that charge is true.
Okay, well, my last question, the federal election coming up, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, who do you got, or what do you make of the craziness that we've seen from both sides?
Yeah, it is crazy, but without reservation, I'll vote for Trump, because I think, again, issues we've talked about from a small business perspective, from an economic development perspective, I think the policies the two would put in place are drastically different. And the future of the country, more from a policy standpoint where they have clear differences, will be shaped in many ways by the United States Supreme Court. We know that there will be one new justice, at least in the next term, depending on who you listen to from a scholar standpoint. There may be 2 or 3 others, and so the next president's going to have a huge impact on the future of the country through Supreme Court nominations as well.
Well, Senator, I want to thank you for all your time and thank you for answering all my questions.
Glad to do so. Thank you, Alex.